going to take a moment to welcome you all for our evening presentation. My name is Amanda Napper. I am the communications specialist for the branch, and you may recognize me from the newsletter. I just wanted to state up front that we have upcoming next month our first in-person session since COVID to celebrate our 40th anniversary. Actually our 42nd anniversary, but we had to put it on hold because of COVID. We're going to have David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist at American Ancestors, join us at Bethany Community Church for a dinner. It'll be $30 a plate, and I am going to put the link, if anybody would like to join us, into the chat. And as well, next month, and that's on October 22nd, starting at 6. And next month as well, our online webinar will be with David Sharon, the head of special collections and archives at Brock University, who is going to talk about using rare books and the primary records at Brock University for your research. He'll delve into the databases that they have at Brock University that may help you find your relatives. And now I'd like to welcome Janet Hodgkins to the branch. Her presentation today is there a loyalist in your family tree? Janet has been a member of the Colonel John Butler Niagara branch of the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada since 2010, and she's currently the program chair and director. She's descended proudly from 7 United Empire Loyalists and resides in Wainfleet Township and is a president of the Wainfleet Historical Society. And I'm going to put the link for the Wainfleet Historical Society into the Facebook group into the chat. If you'd like to at some point have a look over and like the page, that would be great. I'm just going to mention in advance, housekeeping wise, if you have any questions, please feel free to message me directly. I'm Ontario Ancestors. I'm the host. I should be at the top of your screen. And I will pass on the questions to Janet when there's a moment to ask her those questions. So thank you. And for now, I'm going to pass it over to Janet. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I'm happy to be here tonight. Is there a loyalist in your family tree? If your family came to the Niagara Peninsula in the 1780s from the newly formed United States of America, you likely do have a loyalist in your family tree. If you do have one loyalist in your family tree, you likely have more than one. Loyal she began, loyal she remains. That's the motto of the province of Ontario. The foundations for the modern province of Ontario were laid down by the United Empire Loyalists. The Loyalists were refugees from the American Revolutionary War. They were forced to flee the new United States for fear of persecution, imprisonment, or even death. In this presentation, I will explore who the Loyalists were. I will tell you a little bit about the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada. And I will explain how to apply for your own certificate for your own Loyalist ancestor. I have 7 of them. I have 7 Loyalist ancestors and 7 certificates. And you can see one of my certificates in the bottom right-hand corner here. That's one of the first ones I got. To answer the question, who were the Loyalists, we have to go back in time to 1776. In 1776, the map of North America looked like this. The pink part shows the 13 colonies, which belonged to Great Britain. And above that is Quebec, which encompasses not only modern day Quebec, but what's now Ontario. In 1776, some of the residents of the 13 colonies, who called themselves patriots, wanted to separate from Great Britain, so they declared war on Britain. When the War for American Independence ended years later in 1783, the map of North America looked like this. The blue part became the newly formed United States, and the red part remained British. The losers in this war were the Loyalists, those who had wanted to remain as British subjects. Because they had proclaimed their loyalty to the king, they feared repercussions by the new regime in the States. And so huge numbers of Loyalists left the United States and moved to other British territories. This map shows the migration of some of the Loyalists. Now, a few Loyalists did go to England, and a few, mostly the ones from the southern colonies, went to British islands in the Caribbean, such as Jamaica or the Bahamas, or they went to Florida, which was another British colony. But the largest number of Loyalists came to Canada. There were an estimated 60,000 of them. And as you can see from the map, a lot of them came up the eastern seaboard and settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, or came down the St. Lawrence. Others went overland and settled in what's now eastern Ontario. And many came overland and settled in the Niagara Peninsula. And that is our focus tonight. Here we see the Loyalists arriving in Canada. But who exactly were these Loyalists? If you have a picture in your mind of a toffee-nosed Brit wearing a powdered wig and a monocle, clutching his monogrammed silver and climbing into a carriage, well, you couldn't be more wrong. The Loyalists were not one homogeneous group at all. They were multi-ethnic and multiracial. They were from all levels of society. Many were soldiers who had fought for Britain. And these would not be the famous redcoats. These were ordinary colonial militia. Very few Loyalists would have considered themselves English, I think. Many Loyalist families had been in North America for generations. The family of my own Loyalist ancestors, for example, had come from England, but it was way back in 1630. So they had been in North America for generations by 1776. Other Loyalist ancestors of mine had come from a German background. They emigrated to North America during the Great Palatine Migration, which was in the early 1700s. There were Loyalists of many, many different nationalities. There were also Black Loyalists. Some were free, some had been soldiers, and some were enslaved. There were about 15,000 enslaved Black Loyalists who were brought here by their owners. There were a great many Indigenous Loyalists. The Six Nations, for example, had mostly allied with the British, and many, many of the Six Nations people came to Upper Canada. So the Loyalists were everybody in the 13 colonies. They came from all parts of life. Above all, they were refugees from a civil war. Some had spent time in refugee camps. Many had had their property seized by the Patriots. They had lost their homes, their lands, their farm animals, all of their possessions. Dorchester, who was the governor of Canada at one time, issued a proclamation in 1789, which honored the Loyalists. And here is an excerpt from Lord Dorchester's proclamation. It says, "Those Loyalists who have adhered to the unity of the empire and joined the royal standard before the Treaty of Separation in 1783, and to all their descendants by either sex, are to be distinguished by the following capitals affixed to their names, UE, alluding to their great principle, the unity of the empire." There are two things to note from this. One is that a United Empire Loyalist is someone who showed loyalty to the crown before 1783. And the other thing is that the honorific UE is being given to descendants of loyalists by either sex. That is not just the sons, but the daughters as well. So who is a United Empire Loyalist? It's not me, but it is my ancestor. My ancestor is UEL, United Empire Loyalist, and I, as a descendant, am UE, which stands for Unity of the Empire. UE is the only hereditary title in Canada. Lord Dorchester also provided a tangible reward for loyalty: free land. Land grants were available not only to the UEL, the loyalist himself, but also to his sons and daughters. And this proclamation spells it out that those sons and daughters, when they arrive at full age, could get 200 acres of land, more or less, it says. 200 acres of land was, I think, the minimum. There was a sliding scale of how much land people got. Military officers, for example, got more than 200 acres. And here we see a loyalist map of Upper Canada showing some of those settlements in the 1780s. Now, if you look at this, things to notice are the Six Nations Reserve, which was created then for the Indigenous allies of the British. And the area that we are interested in is right here. It says Butler's Rangers, Niagara Township. If you're doing research about your loyalist ancestor, you might find some strange terminology. You might say settled in the home district, and you will say, where is the home district? Well, as you can see from this map, Ontario, which wasn't called Ontario then, but it was all carved up with, and all the areas have different names. Now Niagara is still the same, but there's the home district. And here's London, for example. And it doesn't mean just the city of London, it's all this territory, the Bruce Peninsula. So terminology changes with time. The United Empire Loyalist Association of Canada was established over 100 years ago in 1914. And it is through this organization, and only through this organization, that descendants of a UEL can apply to receive a certificate recognizing their lineage. With that certificate comes the privilege of putting UE after your name. As I said before, UE is the only hereditary title in Canada. The United Empire Loyalist Association of Canada is quite a mouthful, so often we just say UELAC. There are 29 branches of UELAC across the country, and there is a website, uelac.ca. Now, does your ancestor qualify to be UEL, to be a loyalist? Well, according to UELAC, a United Empire Loyalist can be defined as a resident of the 13 colonies at the commencement of the American Revolution, who had joined the Royal Standard and had been resident within the British lines before the Treaty of Separation in 1783. So to be UEL, your ancestor had to be living in the 13 colonies by 1776, and according to Lord Dorchester's proclamation, have proven loyalty to the Crown before 1783. Those are the two critical things to remember. Resident of the 13 colonies, proved loyalty before 1783. UELAC spells this out very, very clearly, who qualifies to be a United Empire Loyalist. There are, I think, 7 conditions. The first is for people who are accepted to be a United Empire Loyalist. The first is loyalists who served in a loyalist regiment during the Revolutionary War. This is by far the most common qualifier. The vast majority of people who have the UEL designation were soldiers during the American Revolution. Of my 7 loyalist ancestors, 3 were soldiers. So there are other conditions. Number 2, a loyalist who joined the Royal Standard and died either in service or in prison during the American Revolution. I have 3 loyalist ancestors who were imprisoned for their beliefs. Number 3, loyalists who joined the Royal Standard and died on their way to Canada, but their families settled and were eligible for land grants. 4, loyalists who joined the Royal Standard, settled in Canada, and after a period of time, relocated elsewhere. 5, loyalists who joined the Royal Standard and subsequently were unable to complete the land grant regulations due to ill health. 6, loyalist women who have the primary source documentation required to demonstrate that they are loyalists above and beyond being the spouses of loyalists. Loyalist women are very rare, but there are some. I don't have any in my family tree, and I don't think I know any either, but there are a few. And 7, loyalists who supported the British, but arrived as refugees, not on a muster roll, perhaps because of age or poor health or other circumstances such as imprisonment for supporting the British. So if your ancestor meets any of those 7 qualifications, they could be considered a United Empire loyalist. How to get your certificate? There are 3 easy steps. 1, join ULAC, because remember, that's the only body that can issue you a certificate, pardon me. 2, be sure that your ancestor was UEL, according to Lord Dorchester's proclamation, that is, living in the 13 colonies by the outbreak of war and proven loyalty before the end of the war. And then 3, all you have to do is prove your lineage from yourself back to your loyalist ancestor. As I said, 3 easy steps. So the first step is to join ULAC. There are 29 branches across Canada. The Niagara branch is called the Colonel John Butler branch. And you can join simply by going online to ulac.ca and selecting the branch of your choice. There is an annual membership fee. Colonel John Butler is the largest branch in Canada. During non-pandemic times, we meet 8 times a year for a lunch meeting at Betty's Restaurant in Chippewa. We have our lunch, we have a guest speaker, and it's at these meetings that certificates are presented to people who have proven their loyalist ancestry. It's a Kodak moment. Our branch, the Colonel John Butler branch, is named for Colonel John Butler. Colonel John led a corps of Indigenous allies and militia, about 900 men, I think, active for about 6 years during the American Revolution. You can see them here in their green uniforms. These were not British redcoats. They wore green jackets. They fought a guerrilla style of warfare, and the green jackets helped them blend in with the trees. Fort Niagara at the mouth of the Niagara River was the headquarters for Colonel John Butler. And when the war ended, he led most of his men and their families to Niagara, and the majority of Butler's Rangers settled here in the Niagara Peninsula. 2 of my UEL ancestors were Butler's Rangers. So joining ULAC, that was step 1. That's the easiest step. And you can join even if you don't have loyalist ancestors. All you have to do is be interested. Now, to see if your ancestors meet the qualifications to be considered UEL, well, the easiest thing to do is to go to ULAC and look at the Loyalist Directory. On the website, the Loyalist Directory lists over 10,000 names of people who have been proven to be United Empire loyalists. So if you've got somebody you think might have been, you could look it up and see if his name is here. And if you find your ancestor's name here, well, that's the one you should start with. That'll be the easiest thing. When I was growing up, my father and my grandmother always said that our ancestor, John Hayner, was a loyalist. So, in order to apply for a certificate, I started to research John Hayner. Now, there's my certificate. But do you see John Hayner on it anywhere? There is a John Hayner who was UEL. In fact, there are two of them, but I am not descended from either of those John Hayners. I'm descended from Zachariah Hayner. Zachariah Hayner, 1761 to 1813, was UEL. He was my fourth great grandfather. That's why you can't rely too much on those family stories. You have to do the genealogical research. The research showed me that Zachariah Hayner, my fourth great grandfather, was one of Butler's Rangers, and that he received a land grant right here in Waynfleet Township. And his land is not very far from where I live, but nobody lives there now. It's a golf course. So this was one of my first certificates. I started at the beginning, I had two certificates, one for Zachariah Hayner and one for Aaron Doan. Aaron Doan is an ancestor on my mother's side. His dates are 1756 to 1844, and he was my fourth great grandfather. When I began to read about Aaron Doan, I knew that I had found another Loyalist ancestor. You might have heard a presentation that I gave to this group over a year ago, I think. It was called My Notorious Ancestors. And in that, I outlined the exploits of the notorious Doan gang during the American Revolution. Aaron Doan was not a soldier. He was part of a gang of spies and scouts who liberated POWs. They supplied horses and money to the British side. They were essentially Secret Service. Aaron Doan was the James Bond of his day. He was imprisoned and he was reprieved from the gallows not once, but twice. So he escaped and came to Canada, and he's buried in, well, outside of Port Colborne. So he's my other first UEL ancestor. So once I had two certificates, one from my father's side, that was Zachariah Hayner, and one from my mother's side, that was Aaron Doan, I was happy. Then I started to wonder if there were any more Loyalists hiding in the branches of my family tree. So I looked, and there were. I found three more. I found Joseph Doan. Joseph Doan, my fifth great grandfather, was the father of Aaron Doan, UEL. And I realized that he also qualified as UEL. He had been imprisoned for his beliefs. In fact, he had been branded. He had had all of his property confiscated. His house was sold out from underneath him, and his wife and children were kicked out. And the proof that I needed is that Joseph Doan is named as a Loyalist on the Executive Council Loyalist List, which is a document created by the Executive Council of Upper Canada, and it lists United Empire Loyalists. So this, you can read this document at Library and Archives Canada. That's my certificate for Joseph Doan. And here is his name on the Executive Council Loyalist List. His name is right there with star. So here's a tip. If you have one Loyalist ancestor, look at that man's parents and also in-laws. Because if you have one Loyalist ancestor, you likely have more than one. Why is that? When the Loyalists settled here in Niagara, who did they find to marry? Each other. They all married each other. All of the Loyalist families in Niagara are all tangled up together by marriage. Now, Aaron Doan, the son of this Joseph, married Rhoda Cook. And Rhoda Cook was the daughter of Robert Cook, UEL. Robert Cook's dates are 1739 to 1796. So Robert Cook is my ancestor too. He's my fifth great grandfather. Luckily for me, Robert Cook left a will which named his daughter Rhoda Doan. So I was able to get a certificate for Robert Cook too. And here we can see that Robert Cook was a soldier. He was not one of Butler's Rangers. He was part of the King's Royal Regiment of New York. And this is a payroll which gives his name. This screen just shows my line of descent. So I started with Aaron Doan, here he is. Then I was able to get a certificate for his father, Joseph Doan. So the line of descent goes from Joseph to his son Aaron, to his son Levi, to his son Benjamin, to his son Jacob, to his son Alan, to his daughter Muriel, who was my mother, to me. And Aaron married Rhoda Cook over here, who was the daughter of Robert Cook. And then the line of descent is the same on both sides because they both go down through the Doan line. So to get my certificate for Robert Cook, I had to prove he was a loyalist. We saw the muster roll that showed he was. And then I had to link him to Rhoda, and his will did that. And from there on in, I already had the proofs for all of these from my certificates for these. So then I looked at the other side of the family. I looked at Zachariah Hayner. I thought, well, maybe there's more to find out there. And there was. Like Aaron Doan, Zachariah Hayner married the daughter of a loyalist. He married Sophia Braun, or Sophia Brown. She was the daughter of a United Empire loyalist named John Brown. John Brown's dates were 1740 to 1804, and John Brown served in Butler's Rangers. So that made John Brown my 5th great grandfather, and I had another loyalist ancestor. Now, this is Sophia's birth certificate, which you can see is actually in German. Her father, John Brown, was actually born Johannes Braun. His grandfather had come to the Hudson Valley from Germany as part of the Great Palatine Migration in 1710. The Brown homestead in St. Catharines, it's the oldest home in St. Catharines, is where the Brown or Braun family lived. Now, where are you here? A loyalist could make claims for compensation for property lost or damaged during the American Revolution. And this is a sworn statement by John Brown, which talks about his loss. And in it, it says, evidence on the claim of John Brown, late of Schoharie, New York. And the claimant swore that he is a native of America. He lived in Schoharie in Albany County. He declared in favor of the British government from the first. He joined the British in 1781. He later came to Niagara, and he explains he was so persecuted he could stay no longer. He was ordered to quit the country by the rebels as being a Tory. A Tory was kind of a derogatory name for loyalists. And he goes on to state that he served in Butler's Rangers and that in order to stake his claim, he produced his discharge papers. This page just shows how I descend from Zachariah Hayner to his son John Brown Hayner, to his son Obadiah Hayner, to his son John B. Hayner, to his daughter Cora, my grandmother, to her son Harold, who was my father to me. And over here we see that Zachariah married Sophia Brown, who was the daughter of John Brown, who was UEL. So I had the certificate and the proofs for Zachariah down to here. So when I found out that Sophia was the daughter of John Brown, all I needed to do was prove that John Brown was UEL, well, he had been a soldier, and link him to his daughter. And then I had all the proofs I needed from here on down. So to prove your lineage, that's the next step. Well, to get those certificates that I've shown you, I had to prove my descent from those 5 men. And that's what you will have to do too. You can't just say my great-great-great-great-grandfather was one of Butler's Rangers and reach out for a certificate. No, you have to prove your lineage. You must submit documents for every one of the generations from yourself back to your UEL ancestor, and that could be 6 to 8 generations. For each generation, you must provide records for the birth, marriage, death of your ancestor, and you have to show records that show the link between parent and child. The branch genealogist will give you a certificate preparation form, and guidelines for what is an acceptable proof. She will help you lay out the information that you have and the documentation that you have, and she'll let you know what documentation you still need. Proving your lineage is the basic genealogical research that probably everyone watching this webinar knows how to do and has done lots of. You need primary proofs to link each generation to the next. Now, primary proofs, as you know, are documents such as birth, marriage, death certificates, wills, land records, or a government, church, or legal document that clearly states the name of the child and the parent and the relationship between them. When you file your actual application, you need to include a copy of the actual document. For the Loyalist generation itself, in addition to this, you need documents which provide proof of their loyalty to the Crown before 1783. I'm pretty sure you probably know what a primary source document is, but here are two examples. On the right is a page from a land registry copybook, which is in the Friends of the Loyalists collection at Brock University. This page is a sworn declaration that Levi Doan is the father of Benjamin Doan, and it's dated 1846. On the left is my parents' marriage certificate. This is very valuable because it not only proves their marriage, but it gives the names of the parents of both the bride and the groom. I bought this from Service Ontario. If you order any BMD records from Ontario, you must get the long form. The short form is not acceptable. Now, it is fairly easy to get proofs for yourself and your parents and your grandparents, but when you get back a few generations, not so easy. Sometimes the official records are hard to come by, or weren't even, like years ago, births didn't even have to be registered. If you were linking a father to a son, you can do that. But I had to, it's not so easy to link a mother to a daughter, which I had to do for at least one of my applications. Of course, there are many, many resources available. I'm sure you've all used lots and lots of resources. I've listed a few here, but you have tonight access to a handout, which is a multi-page document. This lists dozens of resources. Most of them are online. Some of them will be familiar to you, and some of the more unusual ones that are not so self-explanatory are also included. There's also a page of Loyalist information that you can find on ancestry.ca and a page of Loyalist information that you can find on Family Search. This handout was provided by the branch genealogist at the Colonel John Butler branch, and this will be the most valuable thing you take away tonight. This is much more informative than anything I can tell you. The branch genealogist can help. Once you become a member of ULAC, you will engage the services of the branch genealogist. Now, our branch genealogist is just a walking encyclopedia of Loyalist genealogical knowledge. She has been a tremendous help to me in preparing my certificate applications and also in preparing this webinar. She can assist you, she can answer questions, she can suggest resources. She will not do your research for you, but she will help you. She will work with you at all the steps along the way. As I said, she will give you a certificate preparation form, and when you have completed that, she will check it. She will suggest any necessary corrections, and then when that's all in order, she will send you a certificate application form with instructions on how to fill that in. Once you've done that, she will check it over and she'll send it to the ULAC Dominion genealogist for approval. The branch genealogist is the only person who can give you the certificate application form. She's the only person who can submit the application to the Dominion genealogists on your behalf. Most of your correspondence with the branch genealogist will be by email, but for the actual application, you must also submit paper copies of your proofs. Your file will be very thick. The whole process can take months, but it is well worth it. Now, I've shown you how I started with 2 Loyalist ancestors, Aaron Doan and Zachariah Hayner, and then how I was able to get 3 spin-off certificates, Joseph Doan, Robert Cook, and John Brown from those 2. So when I had 5 certificates, then I was really happy, but I got 2 more after that, and I would like to tell you about them because they're a little bit special. My 6th certificate was for Jacob Ott. Jacob Ott, UEL, 1763-1848, was my 5th great-grandfather. This came about through serendipity. I was reading a ULAC newsletter which mentioned a member who was descended from Jacob Ott. Jacob Ott, I thought, he's in my tree. I didn't know he was UEL. So I checked with the branch genealogist, and she confirmed that Jacob Ott was indeed UEL. She also told me that most of the people who had certificates for him lived in Manitoba. This puzzled me a bit because Jacob Ott lived in Wainfleet. Anyway, I got to work on the application right away. This application presented some challenges to me because after Jacob Ott, the descent was all from mother to daughter, all the way down. Jacob Ott was the only male in that line. The proof that Jacob Ott was UEL is a document called Ward Chipman's List. Ward Chipman was a loyalist who settled in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. He was a lawyer and a judge. He was a member of the Legislative Assembly and the Supreme Court, and he kept a lot of documents. And one of his documents was a list of residents. And besides certain ones, he had written whether or not they were loyalist. And beside Jacob Ott, he had written loyalist. So there was the primary proof that Jacob Ott was UEL. Now, this shows how I descend from Jacob Ott. Jacob Ott is my 5th great-grandfather. And then I descend from his daughter, Catherine Ott, who married a Zavitz, and her daughter, Eliza Zavitz, and her daughter, Rebecca Burse, and her daughter, Clara Shirk, and her daughter, Pearl Robbins, and her daughter, Muriel Doan, to me. So it's women all the way down. Some complications, the name changes every generation. Back in the old days, not too many women were signing legal documents. In fact, some women didn't even know how to write then. So I had some challenges, but this is how it worked out. I started with myself. And to link myself to my mother, Muriel Doan, I used my marriage certificate. That clearly states my mother's maiden name. To link my mother, Muriel Doan, to her mother, Pearl Robbins, I used my parents' marriage certificate. This is dated 1944, and it gave my mother's maiden name. Now to link Pearl to her mother, Clara Shirk, I used Pearl's marriage certificate. This was dated 1920. And then I hit a little bit of a snag. I needed to link Clara Shirk to her mother, Rebecca Burse. But Clara's name wasn't really Clara. Her birth record, which is dated 1869, names her as Rebecca. But in every other record I found, her name is Clara. The explanation is simply that she didn't like the name Rebecca and she always called herself Clara. So I had multiple documents which called her Clara, but her legal name is Rebecca. So when I submitted these documents, I had to put in a statement of explanation describing the name discrepancy and why it was. So you can put in notes of explanation. So then I had to link Rebecca Burse to her mother, Eliza Zavitz, and I was able to get a death record of Rebecca Burse, which named her mother Eliza Zavitz. Now, Eliza Zavitz was born in 1815. Pardon me. And I got stuck here. I had to connect Eliza Zavitz, born in 1815, to her mother, Catherine Ott, who was born in 1794. Catherine Ott was the daughter of Jacob Ott, UEL. So I was really stuck. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I hunted and I hunted, and eventually I hit the jackpot. This is a page from the Quaker meeting records. It's dated November 2nd, 1825. It's from the Pelham Society of Friends at Black Creek, Upper Canada Village. It links my fourth great-grandmother, Catherine Ott, who married a Zavitz, to her daughter, Eliza Zavitz. And the relevant part reads, a request was produced to this meeting from Black Creek preparative for Catherine Zavitz and her three minor daughters, viz. Elizabeth, Louisa, and Rebecca. So there we have proof that Catherine had three daughters and one of them was named Elizabeth. So if you have any Quaker ancestors, the Quaker records are invaluable. They are detailed, they are extensive, and they go back a long, long way. This I found on Ancestry. The last thing that I needed was to connect Catherine Ott to her father, Jacob Ott, UEL. Now, luckily for me, Jacob Ott had made a will in which he named not only his son, but also his 6 daughters. So I had the proof I needed for my certificate. Although Jacob Ott started out in Nova Scotia, he ended up in Wainfleet, and he's buried in Morgan's Point Cemetery. And I saw his grave just this summer. My last Loyalist certificate that I want to tell you about is for my fourth great-grandfather. His name was Caspar Ramey. Caspar Ramey, UEL, 1757 to 1848. I want to tell you about him because this certificate that you are looking at is the first certificate ever issued for Caspar Ramey. And as far as I know, it's still the only one in Canada. Caspar Ramey was not listed in the Loyalist directory. Caspar Ramey had never before been proven to be UEL. Caspar Ramey was in my tree. Like many others, he had come from the new USA after the American Revolution. Now, that alone does not make him UEL. Some people came here for free land. Large groups of Quakers and Mennonites came to Canada because, as pacifists, they were uncertain how they would fare in the new United States, whereas the British government guaranteed them freedom of religion. So why had Caspar Ramey come here? I wondered. Here's what I knew about Caspar Ramey. I knew he had been born in Pennsylvania. I knew that he came to Canada in 1788. He settled in Wainfleet along the shores of Lake Erie, just west of what is now Port Colborne. And then in a few years, he sold his land to the Graybill family, and they built Rathfin Inn on it. And then he moved into Humberston to what's now known as Ramey's Bend, and he lived there until he died in 1848. Well, I was reading a history of early settlers in Humberston, and I came across some revelations about Caspar Ramey that explained all about him coming to Canada. There were excerpts from his land grant application that explained a whole lot. Now, Caspar Ramey did not apply for land until the 1820s. Most of the Loyalists applied in the 1790s. In his application for a land grant, Caspar Ramey said, "At the commencement of hostilities, your petitioner declared himself to be a British subject. Your petitioner had his property taken and destroyed by the revolutionists. Your petitioner was detained in prison until the peace for adhering to the British cause." And then he went on to say, Your petitioner, being ignorant and illiterate, did not know until of late that there was such a thing as a UE list, or that a person could draw land without fee if he had adhered to the unity of the empire. Wow, this seemed to me to be proof that Caspar Ramey was UEL. He swore that he had sided with the crown. He lost his property to the revolutionaries. He was jailed, and poor ignorant and illiterate Caspar Ramey, who didn't even know there was such a thing as a list, really wanted to have his name on that list. Now, in addition to Caspar's own testimony, there were some sworn affidavits by other people. And one was from his friend and neighbor, Henry Zavitz, who said, Caspar Ramey would have joined His Majesty's forces during said war had he not been captured and imprisoned by the enemy. He went on to say that at one time during the revolution, Caspar Ramey, being closely pursued by the enemy, was under necessity of concealing himself in the woods, where he remained for a long time and was fed by me. And then there was another sworn testimony from, get this, a patriot soldier who had arrested Caspar. This is what Joseph Rogers had to say. He said that his regiment was at the time ordered to pursue a party of Tories that had declared for Canada. They overtook the Tories near the Susquehanna River, and after a short skirmish, they carried them to a place called Easttown near the Delaware River. And afterwards, this Joseph Rogers became acquainted with one of the said Tories, Caspar Ramey. Caspar Ramey was put in jail, where he remained. So I thought this was proof. But to be sure, I checked with the branch genealogist, and she agreed with me. And then, so that she could be doubly sure, she checked with the Dominion genealogist, who said, yes, Caspar Ramey didn't meet the requirements to be UEL. So there were the proofs I needed for a new ancestor, and I began the application process. This shows how I descend from Caspar Ramey. I descend from his Caspar to his daughter Anna, and Anna married a Doan. I already had the proofs I needed for all these Doans down to me. So all I really needed was to link Anna to Caspar. For Caspar's proof of loyalty, I needed a copy of the land grant petition, which the branch genealogist was able to locate. And I needed to link Caspar and his daughter Anna. The Wilson Archives in Port Colborne had a copy of Caspar Ramey's will, which named his daughter Anna Ramey Doan. So from there on down, I already had the proofs that I needed. At long last, after more than 200 years, the name of Caspar Ramey, ignorant and illiterate, would be on a loyalist directory, and he would have the initials UEL after his name. Caspar Ramey died at his home in Ramey's Bend, and he's buried in Overholt Cemetery outside of Port Colborne. Here I am on the left, standing beside a corner cupboard, which had originally belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Eliza Zavitz, who was the granddaughter of Jacob Ott, UEL. This cupboard has come down the line from mother to daughter through all those women that I detailed to you. On the right, you can see me receiving my latest two certificates, the one for Jacob Ott and the one for Caspar Ramey. After I had my first two certificates and I began to apply for others, my husband asked me why. Why did I need more certificates when I already had proved that I was descended from United Empire Loyalists on both my father's side and my mother's side? As I explained to him, it's not greed for more certificates. It's a way for me to honor my ancestors, to recognize the hardships that they endured during the American Revolution and the struggles that they suffered when they tried to begin a new life here in the wilderness of Niagara. It's a way for me to acknowledge the contributions that they made to the growth of what is now Ontario. It's a way for me to thank my ancestors for what they did so that I can live here in peace and prosperity. Thank you for listening and watching tonight. Are there any questions or comments?
We have one question so far.
Shall I stop my share?
Yes, you can if you want.
Oh, okay.
I'll put my video back on if I can. There we go. There. Our question is from Karen, and she wants to know, would the 10-year-old stepson of a male loyalist soldier be considered a UEL? They arrived in New Brunswick in 1783 on the Spring Fleet.
That's a question that the branch genealogist can answer. I don't know the answer.
Yes, so Karen, we've entered the website for the for you to find that information into the chat. So if you want to go have a look in there. Do we have any other questions? I didn't see any other questions so far. Someone did say the Doan Gang was they agreed with you that the Doan Gang was a great presentation. Oh, Adele is asking, what does the term expunged mean in relation to a person being on the loyalist list?
Oh, yes, you do see that on the loyalist directory sometimes. I think that's, I'm not sure, but what I think it is that somebody was considered UEL and then later new research showed up that proved that that person wasn't really UEL. Okay. So his name has been expunged from the list.
Interesting. And Karen says, thank you for your answer. And I've got a couple of people saying thank you. Holly says thank you. She enjoyed the presentation, and Elizabeth as well says thank you and lots of great resources. Do we have any more questions at all? Comments? No, I'm not seeing any more. I know I learned a few things from your presentation. We talked at the very beginning about how I don't have any loyalist ancestors at all because all my relatives have come in the last century or so. So I found it interesting, though, the depths of research that you can jump into, especially with the female ancestors, to find links. And I know, I mean, I'm sure everybody here knows how much fun it is to find a new record and link back even further. Oh, and Karen is saying that she is related to Zachariah Hayner through Mary Hayner marrying Abraham Fuller. There you go. So you've got a relative in here.
Cousins.
Perfect. All right. Everybody's saying thank you very much. Jane says she has Doan in her family, so she's going to go have a look. Eileen says her 2 times great grandmother died between 1867 and 1870, but she has no evidence of their death. Oh, and Ken McKinley is saying that expunged means removed from the early loyalist lists, usually by an order in council. Theoretically, this implies that the person may not be reinstated, but some in fact actually were. Thanks for that clarification, Ken.
Just to the person who has Doan ancestors, there's another Doan, Titus Doan, who was a loyalist. So if she may or may not be descended from Aaron Doan, Joseph Doan, or Titus Doan. Titus was a cousin of those other Doans.
There you go. Marilyn says she's new to loyalist research, but your presentation was very helpful. Thank you. Eileen says, Eileen had said another, she was talking about her great grandmother having no evidence of her death. She says her father was UE, but she wasn't named in his will, and her marriage registration only showed her parents' first names. That's, I hate those brick walls. Diane saying great presentation. She heard one of her ancestors was UE. Her great grandmother was a Carl. Beverly says thank you. She piqued her interest. She's going to look into applying on behalf of her husband. Oh, sorry, Eileen, going back to Eileen again. She's asking if she doesn't have that direct evidence, does that mean she won't be able to prove her connection?
This is something she really has to talk over with the branch genealogist.
Yeah, and that link is again in the chat. Okay, and then Claire is saying she's also new to Loyalist research. Her family's told her nothing about any kind of history, so she's going to have to go find those things on her own. But now you've got some new resources you can look at. She's saying thank you very much. And I think unless there's anything else, that will start wrapping up now. I'm just going to remind you again, and thank you, Janet, very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to put up again the Facebook site for the Wainfleet Historical Society if you want to go find Janet over there. And then I'm going to remind everybody as well that we've got some exciting events coming up in October. On October 22nd, we've got our 40th anniversary special in-person dinner event with special guest David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist at American Ancestors. We'll be having dinner at Bethany Community Church, and you can find that event on our website. I'm just going to pop it in here. And sorry, I just see that I sent the Facebook to the wrong group, so I will put that in there again. And as well, we've got in October, our next online event is on October 21st with David Sheridan, the head of special collections and archives at Brock University. Pop on over to our website to sign up for that. It will be an online webinar, and you should, if you've signed up for this one, actually receive a notification on that one as well, and be able to attend. So thank you very much again, and we're going to cut it off now. So thank you, Janet. Have a good evening, everyone. Okay. Bye.
Bye.